Move, or I'll have you removed permanently." Dante Sterling's voice wasn't a threat, it was a prophecy. He stood 6'3" of tailored charcoal wool and pure predatory menace, his hand raised in a moment of absolute desperate fury. At his feet, a glass of mineral water lay shattered on the hardwood floor of the obsidian room, the shards glinting like diamonds under the fractured light of the chandelier. And between the most feared man in Manhattan and his sobbing 6-year-old son stood Clara Vance. She was a waitress in a cheap polyester apron, holding a silver tuning fork like a holy relic. Around them, the Upper East Side's elite sat paralyzed, their forks suspended mid-air, their breath held. 2 bodyguards, men with faces carved from granite and holsters straining against their ribs, had already cleared their jackets. They were one twitch away from painting the walls with Clara's blood. But to understand how Clara found herself staring down the barrel of a Mafia Don's rage, you have to understand the silence that had governed her life long before she stepped into the lion's den. 40 minutes earlier, Clara had been just another ghost in the machine of New York City. She was 24, a Columbia dropout who had traded a promising career in audiology for a service tray and a mountain of medical debt. Her mother's cancer hadn't just taken her life, it had robbed Clara of her future. Now Clara spent her nights serving $500 scotches to men who didn't know her name, all to pay back a debt that felt like a death sentence. "Table 1, Clara, now," her manager, Russo, had hissed, his face slick with the kind of sweat that only comes from knowing you're in the presence of a man who can make you disappear. Dante Sterling walked in like he owned the oxygen in the room. He was the Iron King, the shadow ruler of the Jersey ports and the Brooklyn docks. He was a man of hard angles and cold composure. But trailing behind him was Liam. The boy was a miniature of his father, but his eyes were wide, frantic, and haunted. He didn't walk, he stumbled, his hands clamped over his ears as if the ambient chatter of the restaurant was a deafening scream. As Clara had poured their water, she watched Liam. He wasn't looking at the menu, he was looking at the vibrations in his glass. He reached out a trembling finger to touch the base of the crystal, feeling the microscopic hum of the restaurant. "Stop that," Dante snapped, his voice a low, rhythmic growl. He'd gripped Liam's wrist, pulling it away. "Act like a Sterling, not a statue." Liam didn't flinch. He couldn't hear the command. He only felt the violent vibration of his father's anger, and it sent him into a tailspin. He began to rock. The rocking turned into a guttural, high-pitched cry, the raw, unregulated sound of a deaf child drowning in a sensory storm. That was when the glass shattered. That was when Dante had stood up, his face flushing with embarrassment and helpless rage. And that was when Clara had run. Back in the present, Clara didn't move. She didn't look at the bodyguards. She looked into Dante Sterling's cold, flint-colored eyes. "He's not being difficult, Mr. Sterling," Clara yelled over Liam's sobbing. "He's overstimulated. He can't hear the music, but he can feel the bass in the floorboards, and it's terrifying him. He thinks the world is falling apart because he has no context for the noise." "He is broken," Dante spat, his voice trembling with a dark, bitter grief. "The doctors in Zurich, the surgeons in London, they all say the same thing. He lives in a void. He understands nothing." "He understands everything," Clara countered. She knelt. She didn't try to touch Liam. She knew that in his state, a touch would feel like electricity. Instead, she struck the weighted medical-grade tuning fork against the heel of her shoe. The metal prongs blurred, vibrating at a perfect C128 frequency. The bodyguards lunged forward. "Clara, no!" Russo shrieked from the bar. She ignored them. She took the stem of the vibrating fork and gently, firmly pressed it against Liam's collarbone. The miracle was instantaneous. Liam's entire body went still. His eyes went wide, the panic evaporating as the pure, singular frequency vibrated directly through his bone and into his inner ear. For a boy living in a world of muffled chaos, this was a clear, beautiful sensation, a lifeline. Clara struck it again and placed it against his elbow. Liam let out a rusty, unused sound, a laugh. He reached out with trembling fingers and touched the cold steel. Clara smiled, tears pricking her own eyes. She struck the fork a third time and pressed the stem against the wooden table, gesturing for Liam to put his hand flat on the surface. He obeyed, feeling the hum through the wood.
He looked up at Clara, his eyes shining with an intelligence that had been locked away for 6 years. He tapped the table, then tapped his own chest. "I feel it." The silence in the obsidian room was no longer fearful, it was stunned. Clara stood up slowly, her legs shaking, and faced the Iron King. Dante Sterling was pale, the color drained from his sharp jawline. He was staring at his son as if he were seeing a ghost. "He's not broken, Mr. Sterling," Clara said softly, her voice echoing in the hush. "He just has a different way of touching the world. You've been trying to force sound into his ears. You should have been putting it in his hands." Dante looked at the cheap silver fork, then at Clara. The predatory mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing a man who was simply, devastatingly, a father.
Dante didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at his bodyguards. He reached out and touched Liam's hair, his fingers lingering as the boy continued to tap the table, searching for the last remnants of the vibration. "Who are you?" Dante whispered. His voice was no longer a growl. It was a plea. "I'm just the waitress," Clara said, her heart finally slowing down. She began to turn away, the adrenaline leaving her limbs heavy. "And I think table 1 needs a new glass of water." She didn't get 5 steps. Wait. It wasn't a bark. It wasn't a command. It was the sound of a man who had finally found a map in the middle of a desert. Dante stepped closer, the scent of expensive wool, rain, and something dangerous, gun oil, enveloping her. He reached into his blazer and pulled out a black business card. It was thick, matte, with a single phone number embossed in gold. "You finish your shift," Dante said. The steel was back in his voice, but it was directed at her with a terrifying, laser-focused intensity. "You walk out that door, there will be a car waiting, a black SUV. You will get in." "Sir, I have a life," Clara said, though even she knew it was a lie. Her life was a collection of bills in a cramped apartment in Queens. "You had a life serving pasta to tourists," Dante interrupted, his eyes boring into hers. He glanced at Liam, who was now peacefully tracing the grain of the wood. "Now you have a job saving my son. Don't make me ask twice, Clara." He turned and walked toward the door. His bodyguards fell in behind him like a phalanx of shadows. Liam followed, but as he reached the door, he stopped. He turned back, looked at Clara, and mimicked the motion she had made with the fork, tapping his collarbone. Clara stood in the center of the restaurant, the black card heavy in her hand. She looked at Russo, who was staring at her like she was already a dead woman. She didn't feel dead. For the first time in 3 years, she felt like she had finally heard something worth listening to. 2 hours later, the alley behind the obsidian room smelled of stale rain and garbage. Clara stood by the metal exit door, clutching her purse. Her shift was over. Russo had practically shoved her out, pressing an envelope of cash into her hand, her final wages, and whispering, "Good luck, Clara. Don't look back." A black SUV sat idling at the curb. The windows were obsidian. As soon as the metal door clicked shut behind her, the back door of the SUV swung open. Jax, the giant with the scarred eyebrows, stepped out. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice a low gravel. "Mr. Sterling is waiting." "I need to go home," I stammered. "I have a cat. I have rent." "Your rent has been settled for the next year," Jax said, his face expressionless. "The cat has already been picked up and is being transported to the Sterling estate. Get in the car." Clara's blood ran cold. This wasn't a job offer. This was an acquisition. She got in. The interior was a soundproof capsule of leather and ozone. Dante was sitting in the shadows, a tablet in his hand. He didn't look up as the door slammed, sealing her in. "You audited classes at Columbia for 2 years, advanced audiology. You dropped out when your mother, Sarah Vance, was diagnosed with stage 4. You're $40,000 in debt. You have no living relatives. You're clean, Clara. No record, no habits, just poor." "I'm hard-working," Clara corrected, her voice trembling. "Same thing in this city," Dante countered. He finally looked at her, the rhythmic shadows of the streetlights crossing his sharp jaw. "My son is a Sterling. He will not be broken. He will not be a target. You will live at the estate. You will teach him to speak, and you will teach me to hear him."
The car surged onto the George Washington Bridge, leaving the lights of the city behind. "And if I say no?" Clara asked. Dante turned to her, his dark eyes unreadable. "We're already across the bridge, Clara. You're already in." The car sped into the darkness of the Palisades, towards a fortress built of stone and secrets, and Clara realized she had just traded her debt for a gilded cage.
The vibration of the heavy oak door clicking shut felt like the sound of a jail cell locking. Clara Vance stood in the center of a nursery that was larger than her entire apartment in Queens, but it felt twice as small. The walls were painted a soft, expensive eggshell blue, and the carpet was thick enough to swallow her ankles. It was a room filled with the spoils of a king, a gold-plated electric train set that whistled silently as it circled the room, a 5-foot-tall robotic dinosaur that sat dormant in the corner, and a television the size of a billboard playing cartoons to an audience of one. Liam Sterling sat in the middle of this mountain of wealth, his back to her. He wasn't playing with the robots or the trains. He was clicking 2 Lego bricks together. Click, click, click. He wasn't building a castle. He was just feeling the sharp plastic snap in his fingertips, the only feedback the world was giving him. "You're gonna have to do better than a tuning fork if you want to survive here, Clara." She didn't turn around. She knew the voice. Jax, the enforcer with the scarred eyebrow and the neck of a bull, was leaning against the doorframe. He looked out of place among the stuffed bears and primary colors. He looked like a man who spent his nights making people scream, which, Clara realized with a jolt of ice in her gut, was exactly what he did. "I didn't ask to be here, Jax," Clara said, her voice tight. "I was abducted." "You were acquired," Jax corrected, his voice a low gravel. "There's a difference. Dante Sterling doesn't abduct waitresses, he hires specialists. You just happened to be serving water when he realized you were one." The drive up to Westchester had been a blur of dark highways and the terrifying realization of what total control actually meant. As the black SUV had pulled up to the Sterling Fortress, a sprawling Gothic Revival mansion tucked behind 10-foot stone walls and iron spikes, Clara had watched the cameras swivel to track their movement. The housekeeper, a stern woman named Elena who looked like she hadn't smiled since the late 90s, had shown Clara to her room. It was a palace of silk and mahogany, with a private balcony overlooking the dark wooded cliffs of the Hudson River. But when Clara had tried to open the door 10 minutes later to find Liam, she found a man in a tactical vest standing in the hallway. "The boss says you stay in the West Wing," the guard had said. She was a guest of honor and a prisoner of war. Back in the nursery, Clara took a breath and kicked off her shoes. If she was going to reach Liam, she had to meet him on his level. She had to feel the house the way he did. She walked toward the boy in her socks, stepping heavily. Thump, thump, thump. Liam didn't turn around, but he stiffened. He felt the rhythmic vibration of her footsteps through the floorboards. He knew someone was behind him. Clara sat down on the floor, 5 feet away from him. She didn't wave, she didn't speak. She waited. Liam turned slowly, his dark, expressive eyes widening when he recognized the lady with the magic metal stick. He clutched his red Lego brick like a weapon. Clara reached into the pocket of her fresh, high-end wool cardigan, part of the wardrobe Dante had provided. She didn't pull out the tuning fork. Instead, she pulled out a small, deflated rubber balloon. She'd grabbed a handful from the restaurant's party supply closet before she was whisked away. She blew it up, her cheeks puffing out, and tied it off with a sharp snap. Liam watched her, his head tilted. To him, the balloon was just a floating orb of red plastic. It had no value. Clara placed the balloon on the floor between them. She pulled out her phone and searched for a track with a heavy, driving bass line. She turned the volume to maximum and pressed the phone's speaker directly against the skin of the balloon. Most people watch these stories, enjoy the production I pour my soul into, and then leave without saying a word. That's a silent betrayal. If you've made it this far into Clara's cage and you still haven't liked the video or subscribed, then you're just as cold as the Iron King himself. Don't leave me narrating to an empty room. Prove you have a heart and subscribe now, or the story ends when the screen goes dark. "Liam," she mouthed, though she knew she couldn't hear her name. She gestured for him to touch the balloon. The boy hesitated, his fingers trembling. He crawled forward on his knees until he was inches away. He reached out and placed his small palms flat against the taut rubber surface.
The change in his face was like a sunrise. The balloon acted as a physical amplifier. The heavy bass of the music wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a rhythmic heart, a thumping, living thing that resonated through the rubber and directly into the nerves of his hands. His eyes lit up with a raw, brilliant intelligence. He could feel the patterns. He could feel the tempo. He let out a high, breathless laugh, a sound so unused it was almost a rasp. He hugged the balloon to his chest, closing his eyes as the music vibrated against his ribcage. "I bought him a Steinway piano that cost more than a suburban house," a voice said from the shadows of the doorway. Clara jumped, her phone sliding off the balloon. Liam flinched at the sudden loss of sensation, looking around frantically.
Dante Sterling was standing there. He had discarded his suit jacket, his white sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and etched with intricate dark ink. He looked exhausted, the weight of his empire pressing down on his shoulders, but his eyes were fixed on his son. "I bought him a home theater with a subwoofer that can shake the foundation of this house," Dante said, walking into the room. He looked at the red balloon with a mixture of awe and irritation. "And you make him laugh with a 10-cent piece of rubber." "Money doesn't buy physics, Mr. Sterling," Clara said softly, picking up her phone. "You've been trying to give him the best technology. He doesn't need tech. He needs tactile. He needs to touch the sound, not just be near it." Dante sat down on the floor. It was a jarring sight. The dawn of New York, a man who decided who lived and died in the city, sitting on a plush rug in his socks. He looked at the balloon, and at Clara. "Show me," he commanded. Clara handed him the balloon. "Hold it. Close your eyes." Dante hesitated, looking at the balloon as if it were a live grenade, but he did it. He closed his eyes and gripped the rubber sphere. Clara pressed the phone back against it and hit play. Dante sat there for a long minute. He felt the thrumming beat against his palms, the way the vibration seemed to bypass the ears and go straight to the bone. He opened his eyes and looked at Liam. Liam was watching his father with a terrifying intensity. Slowly, tentatively, the boy reached out. He placed his hands on top of Dante's. Dante froze. He stopped breathing. He never touches me," Dante whispered, his voice cracking for the first time. "Not unless I make him." "He's sharing the experience with you," Clara said, her heart aching for the man, despite the gun she knew was tucked into the small of his back. "The vibration is the first bridge you've ever built that he actually wants to cross." Liam looked up at Dante's face. He reached out a small hand and touched the sharp, dark stubble on Dante's jawline. It was a moment of pure, silent connection. Suddenly, the silence was shattered. Jax appeared at the door, his face like a mask of iron. "Boss," he said, his voice urgent, "we have a problem at the docks. The Russians intercepted the shipment. They're claiming the North Pier." The father vanished. The Iron King returned in a heartbeat. Dante stood up, the warmth evaporating from his eyes. He reached for his jacket, which Jax was already holding. "Jax, get the cars. Call the Brooklyn crew. I want every Russian within 5 miles of that pier neutralized." He turned back to Clara, his gaze intense enough to burn. "Stay here. Do not leave this wing. Do not open the door for anyone but me or Jax. Do you understand?" "Dante, what's happening?" Clara asked, clutching the balloon to her chest as Liam retreated back to his bricks. Dante checked the magazine of a matte black pistol, the metallic clack echoing in the nursery. "Welcome to the family, Clara," he said, his voice cold as the Hudson. "Try to keep the boy busy. I have a war to finish." He strode out, the heavy oak door slamming shut behind him. Clara stood in the silence of the nursery, the red balloon still vibrating in her hands, realizing that she wasn't just a governess in a mansion. She was a witness in a fortress, and the war was finally coming inside.
"Don't you dare close your eyes, Sterling. If you die on this kitchen island, I'm telling Liam you just went on a very long business trip. Do you hear me? Look at me." Clara Vance's voice was a whip, cracking through the sterile, fluorescent air of the mansion's industrial kitchen. Her hands, usually so gentle when guiding Liam's fingers across a tuning fork, were now slick with a terrifying hot crimson. Dante Sterling was sprawled across the stainless steel prep station, his breath coming in ragged, wet hitches. His pristine white dress shirt was a ruin, the left side soaked through with a spreading darkness that smelled of iron and ozone. "I've had worse," Dante wheezed, his teeth gritted so hard Clara thought they might shatter. His skin was the color of wet ash, but his dark eyes were still burning, fixed on her with a feral intensity. "Shut up and hold this," Clara snapped, shoving a wad of sterile gauze into his hand. "Jax, I need the tactical med kit from the security room and a bottle of the highest proof vodka in the cellar. Now!" Jax, the massive enforcer who usually looked like an immovable object, was pale. He didn't argue. He turned and sprinted toward the hallway, his boots thundering against the marble. 2 hours earlier, the fortress had been a tomb of silent tension. Dante had been gone for days, handling the Russian problem at the docks. Clara had spent those nights in the nursery, cocooned in a world of vibrations and hand signals with Liam. They were making progress, real progress. Liam could sign father, home, and safe. But at 3:15 a.m., the silence had been shattered by the sound of a black SUV screaming up the driveway, its tire shredding the gravel. Then came the crash of the service door and the heavy rhythmic thud of a man being dragged. Clara had found them in the hallway. Dante was leaning on Jax, his face a mask of agony, blood dripping from his fingertips onto the white floorboards. "No doctors," Dante growled when Jax reached for his phone. "Too much heat. The police are swarming the North Pier. If a surgeon shows up here, the DA will be right behind him." "Then he'll bleed out in the hallway," Jax roared. "Put him in the kitchen," Clara commanded. She didn't know where the authority came from. Maybe it was the ghosts of her Columbia education, the thousands of hours she'd spent studying anatomy, or maybe it was just the raw instinct of a woman who refused to let another person she cared about be taken by the dark. Back in the kitchen, Clara scrubbed her hands until they were raw, the scent of antiseptic stinging her nose. Jax returned, slamming a black nylon bag and a bottle of premium vodka on the counter. "Get out," Clara said, not looking at him as she threaded a surgical needle. "Jax." "I stay with the boss," Jax countered, his hand hovering near his holster. "You stay in my way," Clara snapped, her eyes flashing with a fire that made the enforcer blink. "Go to the security room. Check the perimeter. If anyone followed you here, Dante is a sitting duck. Go." Jax looked at Dante. Dante gave a microscopic nod. Jax vanished into the shadows of the hallway. Clara turned back to the man on the table. She grabbed a pair of kitchen shears and began cutting away the remnants of his shirt. The wound was ugly, a jagged graze across his ribs and a deep, pulsing puncture in his upper shoulder. A bullet had passed through, missing the bone but tearing through the dense muscle of a man who spent 4 hours a day in a private gym. "I spend days crafting these scripts and hours narrating them just for you, but if the likes don't start showing up, I'll have to assume you don't care about Liam's fate or Clara's survival in this lion's den. If you want to see them make it to the final chapter, you'd better hit that like button right now. The algorithm is the only thing keeping this story alive. Don't let it die." "This is going to be hell, Dante," Clara whispered, unscrewing the vodka bottle. "Just do it," he gasped. She poured the alcohol directly over the shoulder wound. Dante's back arched off the stainless steel, his muscles contracting with such violence that the table groaned. He didn't scream. He wasn't the kind of man who gave the world the satisfaction, but the growl that tore from his throat was the sound of a wounded predator. Clara didn't flinch. She couldn't. She worked with a clinical, detached precision, her fingers moving through the blood to find the arterial bleeder. She clamped it. She sutured. She moved with the ghost of her mother's voice in her head, the woman she had cared for through 3 surgeries and 1,000 nights of pain. For 40 minutes, the only sound in the kitchen was the hum of the industrial refrigerator and the rhythmic snip of surgical silk.
Finally, Clara tied the last knot. She taped down a thick layer of gauze and slunk back against the counter, her chest heaving. Her face was splashed with his blood, her hands stained to the wrists. Dante lay back, his eyes half closed, his breath finally leveling out. The harsh fluorescent lights above cast deep shadows under his cheekbones, making him look less like a king and more like a man. "You have good hands," Dante murmured, his voice a ghost of its usual self. "I learned because I had to. Necessity is a brutal teacher, Sterling." She poured him a glass of water and held it to his lips. He drank greedily, his eyes never leaving hers. There was a heat in that gaze that had nothing to do with the fever of a wound. It was intense, stripping away her defenses, making her feel more exposed than if she was standing there naked.
"You think I'm a monster," Dante said. It wasn't a question. "I think you're a man who lives in a world where silence is the only way to stay alive," Clara replied. "But silence didn't save you tonight. Jack said the Russians were waiting for you. How?" Dante's face hardened, the iron returning to his expression even through the pain. "They knew the route. They knew exactly which SUV I was in. It wasn't a leak at the docks, Clara. If you watched this entire emotional journey, Clara stitching up a dying man to save a child's future, and you didn't feel enough to even leave a like, then you must have a heart of stone. You're no better than the villains in this story. Prove you actually have a heart and a soul by subscribing before the screen goes dark. Don't be the person who watches the world burn and says nothing." Dante reached out and gripped her wrist. His hand was burning hot, his pulse thrumming against her skin like a trapped bird. "The Russians, they shouted something before they opened fire," Dante whispered, his voice laced with a cold, terrifying rage. "They said a man who can't raise a son can't run a city. They said Liam was my anchor, and they were going to cut it." Clara felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "They know about his condition. They're using him to get to you." "In my world, a weakness is a target," Dante said, pulling her slightly closer. "They think because he can't hear he's useless. They think he makes me soft." "He's not a weakness, Dante," Clara said fiercely. "He's brilliant. He's learning. He's stronger than any of those animals at the docks." Dante looked at her, and for a fleeting second the mask of the Iron King slipped. He pressed her hand against his chest, right over the steady, heavy beat of his heart. "Make him strong, Clara. Teach him everything. Because if something happens to me, the wolves will come for him. They won't show him mercy because he's a child. They'll kill him because he's a Sterling." "I won't let anything happen to him," Clara promised, her voice cracking. "And I won't let anything happen to you either. You have to stay alive to see him grow up." The air in the kitchen shifted. The smell of antiseptic and blood seemed to fade, replaced by a sudden electric tension. Dante pulled her an inch closer. Clara leaned in, her breath hitching, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Boss!" The kitchen door swung open. Jax burst in, his phone in hand, his face pale as a ghost. Clara jumped back, her face flushing a deep crimson. Dante groaned, the moment shattered as he sat up, clutching his side. "What is it?" Dante barked. "We ran the encrypted comms from the pier. The signal didn't come from a burner phone in Jersey, boss. The coordinates, the leak came from inside this house." Dante's eyes turned into shards of black ice. He looked at the ceiling, toward the west wing where his son was sleeping. The enemy wasn't at the gates. The enemy was in the living room. The silence in the Sterling fortress had become a weapon. 2 weeks had passed since Dante had bled out on the kitchen island, and the atmosphere in the mansion was no longer just tense, it was suffocating. Security had tripled. Every maid, gardener, and guard had been interrogated, polygraphed, and put under 24-hour surveillance. Dante was a man possessed, a ghost haunting his own halls, searching for the traitor who had sold his route to the Russians. But in the West Wing, Clara Vance was building a different kind of world. "Father," Clara signed, tapping her thumb to her forehead with a gentle, rhythmic motion.
Liam watched her, his dark eyes laser-focused on her hands. He mimicked the gesture, his small thumb hitting his brow with a look of intense concentration. "Father," Clara whispered, her heart swelling. She didn't care if he couldn't hear the word. She cared that he knew the meaning. Dante stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the harsh afternoon sun. He'd discarded the bandages, his shoulders stiff but functional, his charcoal suit pressed to perfection. He watched them for a long time, a strange, haunted expression on his face, half pride, half agonizing sorrow. He looked like an outsider peering through the glass at a life he didn't know how to lead. "He's asking for you," Clara said, not turning around. She had learned the sterling scent, expensive wool, dark tobacco, and the cold metallic tang of a man who lived by the gun. Dante walked into the nursery, his boots heavy on the carpet. Liam saw him and didn't retreat. Instead, the boy scrambled up and ran to his father. He grabbed Dante's hand and placed it firmly against his own throat. Liam made a low humming vibration. Dante knelt, his large scarred hand trembling slightly as it rested on his son's neck. He felt the hum. He felt the life. "I promised him an outing," Dante said, his voice rough. "He's been a prisoner in this house since the night I was shot. I've secured the Bronx Botanical Gardens, private access, no public, 20 men sweeping the perimeter." "Is it safe, Dante?" Clara asked, her brow furrowing. "After what happened at the docks?"
"It's the safest place on earth today," Dante vowed. "I need him to see the sun, Clara, and I need to see him in it." The Bronx Botanical Gardens were a lush, surreal explosion of violet and emerald, a stark contrast to the gray stone and security cameras of the Sterling estate. The entire conservatory had been rented out, the glass domes glittering under a pale New York sky. It was empty, save for the Sterling enforcers posted at every exit and hidden among the ferns. Liam was in heaven. For a child who navigated the world through his eyes and his skin, the conservatory was a sensory paradise. He ran from orchid to orchid, his fingers tracing the velvet petals, his face lit with a pure, unadulterated wonder. Dante walked beside Clara, his hands clasped behind his back. His eyes never rested. They scanned the tree line, the rafters, the shadows behind the palm trees. "He looks normal," Dante said softly, "like any other boy." "He is a normal boy, Dante," Clara corrected him gently. "He just experiences the world in high definition. He doesn't hear the wind, he feels the pressure change. He doesn't hear a voice, he sees a soul." Dante stopped walking. He turned to Clara, the humidity of the greenhouse making a stray lock of hair curl against her forehead. He reached out and tucked it behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "You've changed everything, Clara. I was ready to bury my son in silence. You gave him a bridge." "I see you. You've been watching these chapters every night, enjoying the drama and the intensity of this story for free, yet you still haven't hit that subscribe button. Are you really going to keep taking without giving back? Clara is risking her life for this child, and all I'm asking is for a click. Show some appreciation and subscribe so I know you're actually here." Liam was 20 yards away, standing by a massive reflective glass pane that separated the tropical wing from the desert wing. He was tapping the glass, watching his reflection. Suddenly, Liam stopped. He pressed his face against the glass, his eyes narrowing. In the reflection of the glass, behind a dense cluster of tall cacti in the adjacent room, he saw something, a tiny, rhythmic sparkle of light, a rhythmic winking like a star. Liam didn't know what a sniper scope was. He didn't know what a lens flare meant, but he knew the bad sign Clara had taught him. The boy spun around, waving his arms frantically. He pointed at the glass, then tapped his forehead, the sign for father, then slashed his hand across his throat. "Danger! Father! Danger!" "Dante, get down!" Clara screamed. She didn't think, she didn't calculate. She threw herself to the left, tackling Liam to the ground and shielding his small body with her own. Crack!
The sound of the high-powered rifle shot shattered the tranquility of the gardens. The glass pane, exactly where Dante's head had been a second before, exploded into a million diamond-like shards. "Sniper!" Dante roared, his pistol out before the glass even hit the floor. Chaos erupted. The Sterling security team swarmed, shouting orders, their suppressed submachine guns barking into the foliage. 2 more shots rang out, digging divots into the stone path inches from Clara's boots. "Stay down," Dante screamed, firing blindly toward the upper walkway of the glass dome. He grabbed Clara and Liam by the collars and dragged them behind a massive concrete planter. Liam was crying, not because of the noise he couldn't hear, but because he could feel the terrifying, erratic vibrations of the gunfire slamming into the ground and the concussion of his father's voice. Dante's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his face going a deathly translucent white. It was a text from an unknown number. "The boy is the anchor. Cut the anchor. The ship sails free. V." Dante's breath hitched. A sound of pure, soul-crushing betrayal tore from his throat. "Victor," Dante growled. Victor Sterling, Dante's cousin, his underboss, the man who was currently heading the security detail at the North Gate, the man who held Liam when he was a baby. "He sold us out," Dante whispered, his eyes turning into shards of black ice. "He thinks if Liam dies, the Sterling line is cleansed. He thinks I'll be the leader he wants if I have nothing left to love." In the underworld, loyalty is everything. Victor just proved he's a rat, a traitor to his own blood. If you enjoy the story but refuse to like the video, aren't you just like him, turning your back on the people who give you everything? Don't be a traitor. Show your loyalty to the Sterling family and hit that subscribe button now. "They're inside, Dante," Clara gasped, clutching Liam so hard her knuckles were white. Dante knew. He reached for his phone. He tapped out a tense message to his security team. "Get everyone to the exit, now." "What about you?" Clara cried. Dante looked up at the balcony, where the silhouette of Victor was now visible, holding an assault rifle. Victor looked down at them with a sorrowful, twisted expression. "I'm going to have a family reunion," Dante said. He stepped out from behind the planter, fully exposed, raising his weapon with a steady hand. He didn't look back. "Run, Clara. Take the boy and run. If I don't see you in an hour, Jax has instructions. Go." Clara grabbed Liam, lifted him into her arms, and sprinted through the ferns. She didn't look back at the gunfire. She didn't look back at the glass house as it turned into a killing jar. She ran for the boy's life, while behind her, the Iron King began to tear his own empire apart.
The service exit of the Botanical Gardens was a blur of gray rain and white-hot adrenaline. Clara Vance burst through the heavy metal doors, clutching Liam to her chest so tightly she could feel the frantic, rabbit-like thrum of his heart against her ribs. "Get in! Get in now!" Jax roared the command as the black SUV screeched to the curb, the tires shredding the manicured lawn. Clara threw herself into the back seat, shielding Liam with her body just as a bullet shattered the rear taillight. "Where is Dante?" Clara screamed, her voice cracking as she grabbed the back of Jax's seat. "He's still in there. Jax, we can't leave him." "He stays to clean the mess," Jax shouted over the roar of the engine as he floored the accelerator, weaving through the garden's exit with terrifying speed. "If he dies a boss. If the boy dies, the line ends. Sit back and stay down." Clara slumped against the leather, pulling Liam into her lap. The boy was trembling violently. He couldn't hear the sirens wailing behind them or the screech of the tires, but he could feel the terrifying, erratic vibrations of the speeding car. He looked up at Clara, his eyes wide and glassy with a fear that had no name. Desperate, Clara reached into the pocket of her coat. Her hands shook so hard she almost dropped it, but she managed to pull out the tuning fork. She struck it hard against the metal seatbelt buckle, ping, and pressed the stem against Liam's sternum. The effect was a lifeline. The pure, steady hum flooded the boy's system, overriding the chaotic tremors of the car. Liam's breathing hitched, then slowed. He looked up at Clara, his small hand reaching out to tap his forehead. "Father." Clara swallowed a sob, kissing the top of his head. "He's coming, Liam. I promise. He's coming."
This channel is for the loyal ones, the ones who stand by these characters through the blood and the betrayals. If you're just here to lurk without liking or subscribing, maybe you're in the wrong place. We're at the finale, the moment of truth. If you're truly part of the family, prove it by hitting that subscribe button right now. Only the loyal stay until the end. Back in the shattered ruins of the Palm House, the air was thick with gunpowder and the scent of dying tropical flowers. Dante Sterling moved through the ferns like a panther, blood dripping from a cut on his cheek, his eyes fixed on the upper walkway. "Come out, Dante," Victor Sterling's voice echoed from above, distorted by the glass dome. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. You know I'm right. The boy is a liability. A death dawn, it's a death sentence for the Sterling name. I did this for the family." Dante crouched behind a stone planter, checking his last magazine. "You call it a liability, Victor?" he shouted back, his voice a low, lethal growl. "I call it legacy. You think power is about who can hear the loudest? It's about who can endure the silence." "Legacy is built on strength." Victor stepped out onto the railing, his assault rifle leveled at the foliage where Dante was hiding. "The Russians were right. You've gone soft. You're choosing a broken child over the empire I helped you build." "He's not broken," Dante said, stepping out from behind the planter. He stood in the center of the path, fully exposed, his arms spread wide. You're just noise, Victor." Victor's finger tightened on the trigger. He looked at his cousin, the man he'd grown up with, the man he'd betrayed, and for a second he hesitated. That second was all Dante needed. Dante didn't fire at Victor. He fired at the massive 500-pound decorative iron chandelier hanging directly above the walkway. The chain snapped with a high-pitched crack. Victor looked up, but the shadows of the falling iron were already upon him. The walkway collapsed under the weight, sending the underboss and his treachery plunging 40 feet into the desert wing below. Silence returned to the greenhouse. Dante lowered his gun, his breath hitching in his chest. He didn't look back at the wreckage. He turned and walked toward the rain, toward the woman and the boy who were the only things left in the world that mattered. The safe house was a glass fortress perched on the cliffs of the Palisades, overlooking the dark, churning Atlantic. 3 hours had passed. Clara paced the living room, her eyes fixed on the long, winding driveway. Liam was asleep on the sofa, clutching his red balloon even in his dreams. Suddenly, the front door's security chime echoed through the house. Clara spun around, grabbing a heavy brass lamp from the end table. The door swung open, and Dante stood there. He was a ruin. His suit was torn, his face was masked in soot and dried blood, and he looked like he had walked through the center of a sun. But he was standing. "Dante!" Clara whispered, the lamp slipping from her fingers and hitting the carpet with a dull thud. He crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling her into an embrace so tight it felt like they were trying to merge into a single person. He smelled of rain, iron, and survival. "Victor?" Clara asked into the crook of his neck. "He's gone," Dante murmured. "The leak is plugged. The empire is clean." He pulled back, cupping her face with his large, scarred hands. He looked at her with a raw vulnerability that Clara's breath hitched. "I thought I lost you. When I saw the glass shatter, I thought I'd lost everything." "You didn't," Clara said, leaning into his touch. Dante looked over at Liam. Liam stirred, his eyes fluttering open. When he saw his father, Liam didn't hesitate. He scrambled off the sofa and ran to Dante, throwing his arms around his father's legs. Dante knelt, pulling the boy into his chest, his eyes closing as he buried his face in Liam's neck. Liam reached out, took Dante's hand, and placed it on his own heart. Then he mimicked the sign Clara had been teaching him for weeks. "Connect." Dante looked at Clara, a single tear tracing a path through the soot on his cheek. "Yes," he whispered. "Connected." The big channels with millions of subscribers don't even know you exist. They don't read your comments. They don't care about your journey. But I pour my soul into these stories for you. It's hard to keep going, to keep writing and narrating when everyone watches, but nobody subscribes. If you want to see this channel survive another week, I need your support, now more than ever.
Don't let this be the last story I tell. Subscribe and help me keep the lights on. 6 months later. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a sea of black ties, silk gowns, and whispered conspiracies. The heads of the 5 families were all in attendance, their eyes fixed on the stage. The rumors had been flying for months, that Dante Sterling had gone soft, that he was stepping down because his heir was defective. Dante stood at the podium, looking every bit the Iron King in a tuxedo that fit like armor. "Many of you have questioned the future of the Sterling line," Dante announced, his voice carrying a weight that silenced the room. "You've spent months wondering if I am fit to lead because my son lives in a world you don't understand. Today, I'm not going to tell you the answer. I'm going to show you." Dante stepped aside. Liam walked out onto the stage. He was 7 now, looking sharp in a miniature tuxedo. He walked with a confidence that hadn't been there 6 months ago. He approached the 9-foot Steinway grand piano at the center of the stage. The room went into a stunned hush. A deaf boy at a piano? It seemed like a cruel joke. Liam didn't sit on a standard bench. He sat on a custom-built wooden seat that was bolted directly to the piano's frame. He kicked off his shoes, his bare feet resting on the pedals to feel the reverb. He looked at Clara, who was standing in the wings, signing the word "begin." Liam didn't play a concerto. He played the vibration. He slammed the bass keys with a rhythmic, percussive force that made the crystal chandeliers in the plaza rattle. He followed it with a flutter of high notes that felt like rain against glass. It was raw, haunting, and beautiful. He wasn't playing for their ears. He was playing for their bones. He was playing the sound of the tuning fork, the sound of the greenhouse glass shattering, and the sound of his father's heartbeat. The room was spellbound. Men who had spent their lives ordering hits and hoarding power sat in stunned reverence. As Liam struck the final crashing chord, he let the vibration fade into the floorboards before standing up. He turned to the crowd and made a single sign: "Listen." The ballroom erupted. It wasn't just applause, it was a standing ovation from the most dangerous people in America. Dante walked out and placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his face glowing with a ferocious, unyielding pride. He looked out at the 5 families, his gaze a warning and a promise. The Sterling family does not listen to the noise of the world. We make our own sound. Dante took Clara's hand on one side and Liam's on the other. The Iron King, the girl from Ohio, and the boy who heard with his soul. They stood united, a family forged in silence, but louder than any empire that had come before. Dante Sterling had stopped trying to fix his son, and in doing so, he had finally learned how to hear.